just 1 week. That's all it took for the White House to kick off a bunch of major policy changes. And these could reshape everything from America's place in the world to how healthcare works in our rural towns. So today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look directly at the official documents to see what's actually going on. Okay, let's start with this quote. It's pulled right from an executive order, and it really sets the tone. It's this idea of peace through strength, a theme that you're going to see pop up in pretty much everything that happened this week. It's all about using military and economic might as the main tools both at home and abroad. Let's see how that actually plays out. All right, so to make sense of this whirlwind of a week, we've broken it all down into 4 main buckets. We're going to start on the world stage, then we'll swing back home to look at a major crackdown on fraud. After that, we'll get into some big economic shifts, and we'll wrap up with a huge investment that could totally change rural America. Let's dive in. First up, foreign policy. This week, we saw 2 really big moves that are all about redrawing America's role in the world. The first one is about taking direct action against what the administration sees as threats. And the second? Well, it's a major step back from global organizations. So the first big story happened in Venezuela. White House documents confirmed that a U.S. military operation resulted in the capture of former dictator Nicolás Maduro. Now, this is a huge deal, a major escalation. And the administration is framing it as something they had to do to deal with direct security threats right here in our hemisphere. And this quote from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, it basically lays out the entire playbook for the Americas in a nutshell. You know, it's really a modern version of the Monroe Doctrine. It's a clear signal basically saying the Western Hemisphere is off limits to our adversaries. This isn't just about Venezuela, it's about a much more aggressive stance in the whole region. So after the military action, what's next? The money. The administration moved fast to secure a critical asset, Venezuela's oil money that's sitting in U.S. banks. They issued an executive order to protect these funds from being grabbed in private lawsuits. The stated goal here is to hold on to it for a future, friendlier Venezuelan government. But let's be real, it also gives the U.S. a ton of financial leverage. Now, at the very same time the U.S. was flexing its muscles in the Americas, it was also taking a big step back from the global community. A presidential memorandum kicked off a massive withdrawal from dozens and dozens of international groups. This is a major, major pivot away from the kind of multilateral cooperation we've seen for decades. And the scale of this is, well, just look at that number, 66. That's not a typo. That's the total number of organizations, both inside and outside the UN, that the U.S. is pulling out of. And the official reason? A finding that these groups act contrary to the interests of the United States. So what kind of groups are we talking about here? Well, it's a really wide range. Everything from top climate change panels to organizations focused on gender equality and migration. The administration says these groups either clash with American interests or they just don't work. The big question, of course, is what happens next. What fills the gap when the U.S. leaves, and what does that mean for tackling these huge global issues? All right, let's bring things back home and switch gears from the international stage to domestic policy. The second big theme of the week was a massive, coordinated effort to fight fraud. This involves a brand new enforcement division and a huge multi-agency operation. So the first move in this anti-fraud push is creating a new powerhouse inside the Department of Justice. It's called the Division for National Fraud Enforcement, and the whole idea is to have one central command center for fighting large-scale fraud, bringing together investigations that used to be scattered all over the place. So what does this look like in the real world? Well, the White House is pointing to a massive operation in Minnesota as Exhibit A, and we're not talking about a couple of arrests here. This was an all-hands-on-deck, multi-agency crackdown on what they're calling systemic fraud in state-run programs. I mean, the sheer scale of this is pretty staggering. You've got the DOJ handling almost 100 defendants, Homeland Security sent in 2,000 agents, and then you have agencies like Health and Human Services and the Department of Agriculture freezing payments, enforcing audits. It's a really clear message that the administration is going after what it's calling Minnesota's fraud epidemic with everything they've got. Next up, let's talk about the economy. We saw 2 really important actions this week aimed at shaking things up. One is all about deregulation, trying to speed up big infrastructure projects, and the other is about making sure government contractors are actually held accountable for their performance. Wow, you really can't get more direct than that, can you? This quote is from the head of the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, and they are celebrating what they call the end of NEPA's reign of terror. So, what's NEPA? It's the National Environmental Policy Act. Basically, it's the law that requires those big environmental studies before any major federal projects can get built. And this move is meant to change that process in a big way. Now, this didn't just happen overnight. As you can see from this timeline, getting rid of these regulations has been a top priority since day one of this administration. So by taking away rules that have been around for decades, the White House is trying to fast-track infrastructure projects by fundamentally changing how the federal environmental review system works. Okay, so on one hand you have deregulation, and on the other hand, a laser focus on the defense industry. A new executive order is bringing in some pretty big changes to how the government deals with defense contractors, especially the ones that aren't getting the job done. So how's this new system going to work? Well, it's designed to go after a really specific problem. Defense companies falling behind on critical projects, but still paying out big to their shareholders and executives. The new rules will pinpoint these underperforming companies, make them come up with a plan to fix things, and, this is the big one, it blocks them from doing stock buybacks and ties executive pay to actually delivering on time. All right, for our last big topic, we're looking at a major domestic spending plan. This week, the administration announced a huge new investment that is aimed at completely transforming healthcare in rural communities, and it's happening all across the country. This giant wave of funding is actually part of the Working Families Tax Cuts bill that was passed earlier. But now we're seeing where that money is actually going. It's heading to all 50 states, and it's specifically for rural health. The big idea is to close that growing healthcare gap between cities and rural areas, funding everything from new clinics to better telehealth services. And we are talking about some serious money here. The White House put out a bunch of headlines from local papers all over the country showing hundreds of millions of dollars pouring into states, from Alabama all the way to Alaska. This isn't just some small pilot program. It's a massive nationwide investment into what the administration is calling a rural health transformation. So after all that, what do we make of this whirlwind of a week? We've seen a much more assertive foreign policy, a really tough-on-fraud agenda at home, a big push for deregulation, and a huge new investment in rural America. When you put it all together, these actions give us a pretty clear picture of this administration's priorities. So the real question is, how are these policies going to reshape the country in the months and years ahead?